on its ass, and everyone who seemed important instantly became yesterday's news. And since I never get tired of it, I think it's finally time we look at one of grunge's most famous victims. Vince Neil, Mick Mars, Tommy Lee, Nikki Sixx. Together, they were Motley Crue, and they kicked ass up and down the 80s. In a decade of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they had the most sex, did the most drugs, and played rock and roll so massive that they became the defining band of 80s rock. Not necessarily the best band, but certainly not the worst, but by far the most 80s of 80s rock bands. Bon Jovi? Too clean cut. You could take them home to mom. Poison? They were about as metal as New Kids on the Block. Guns N' Roses? Great band, but they showed up late to the decade and they just never seemed to be having any fun. Motley Crue was the only one who brought the party but kept their dangerous edge. And for 10 years, their trajectory was nothing but up. They released their first record in '81, and by '89, they were the biggest rock group on the planet. And then... oh, it's beautiful. Kurt Cobain arrived and Motley Crue instantly flamed out in a toxic cloud of mascara and hairspray. So here's what happened. After a long break, their first record of the 90s was 1994's Motley Crue, part of a grand tradition of defensively self-titled albums. We named this record after ourselves because it's our definitive statement. We're still relevant, damn it! We're not on the verge of collapse! Motley Crue self-titled had two major things going against it. First off, they had split with their lead singer Vince Neil in 1992 and brought in a new guy, John Corabi, and Tommy Lee especially. Thanks to a heavily publicized celebrity marriage and a leaked sex tape, Tommy Lee was still a household name, and the band was poised to take advantage of his high profile. And so, in January of 1997, the reunited but refashioned Motley Crue debuted, ready to kickstart some hearts. This happened at the American Music Awards, where they were reintroduced to the world by Tommy Lee's then wife, a giant sentient hat.
They got tattooed long before it was fashionable. They got pierced long before it became a trend. And they reinvented themselves with every album, refusing to be pigeonholed into any specific genre, format, or category.
Yeah, what genre even are Motley Crue? It's not like they're primarily identified with one singular, decade-specific style of music. Come on.
They reinvented themselves with every album, refusing to be...
Well, Pamela is lying. She's lying. And you can tell why. She's clearly been told to lay the groundwork for a radical reinvention. You know, pretend like the band was always eclectic and progressive so that this new version goes down smoother. Change is good, actually. So yeah, we're in for a pretty sudden swerve here, so get ready for the new Crue with their brand new single, Shout at the Devil 97? Wait, really? Seriously? Okay, Shout at the Devil was the title track from their second album way back in 1983. It was never a single, shockingly, but it may as well have been. By 97, it was definitely the biggest song of their early years. I guess if you're gonna update a song, it'd be that one. But why do an update at all? I thought this was gonna be the new Crue, you know? Is it radically different? Completely reworked for the 90s? Okay, so, it's exactly the same song, except they play the riff from More Human Than Human over it.
But Glitter was actually a really cool song.
Oh, is it, Vince? Alright, well, we should check that out. Here's the final single, Glitter. And if you thought those other songs were un-Crue-like, well, you ain't heard nothing. It's a ballad with a lot of electronic stuff going on in it. Vince says he didn't like the electronic elements. He felt like he was singing karaoke instead of with a real band. The synths do make an easy target, but honestly I actually kind of like them. I think they're an interesting idea. My problem with the song is just that it's a Motley Crue ballad. Because Motley Crue's ballads blow. Yeah, they're like the one hair band who just couldn't do ballads. They have one good one, Home Sweet Home, and the rest fucking suck. Like, even worse than most hair ballads. Listen to this.
Glitter was a song that was an experiment in writing with other songwriters.
The other songwriter he's talking about is Bryan Adams.
Now nothing can take you away from me.
He had to send the song to Bryan fucking Adams and have him fix it. And I say this with every insult intended. I wish Bryan Adams had written more of this. That line is confirmedly Nicky's. Like, say what you want about Bryan Adams, he at least knows what a romantic lyric is. So do any of them have anything good to say about this record? Yes, actually. Even though the recording process was miserable, Nicky and Tommy seem to have at least a couple fond memories of it. Why? Well, for one, they got to sing.
With Swine, it's like it was one of those like a band effort where like Nicky sang the fucking verses. It's not just the singer, you know. And I like it when the focus moves around. It keeps it fun, keeps it, you know, fresh.
I think it's funny that Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee, who are like hyping up Ringo's importance and fame, would do a disservice to why people liked him at all.
And there he is, all out of key and nervous.
His whole deal was not being a figure of towering importance. Let's look at the knocks against him. He was the worst singer of the Beatles, the worst songwriter, the worst looking, and most importantly, the one who didn't seem like he was ever trying very hard to do much of anything. He wasn't a fiercely driven creative dynamo like Paul, or a spiritualist like George, or an activist like John. And that was his charm. People liked him because he was the underdog, the schlub among geniuses, the regular guy. And how was he able to turn that into a solo career? Well, the glib answer is that he got by with a little help from his friends, which is something that everyone who writes about Ringo is obligated to say at least once. But it's true. And you know what? Having friends is a skill. For some artists, it's their only skill. All the other Beatles and tons of rock stars lined up to work with Ringo, write him songs, back him up, make him successful. And that couldn't have happened if Ringo hadn't just been this profoundly likable guy who knew he'd won the lottery and just wanted to share his good fortune with everyone. He was such a bad fit for pop stardom, and that's exactly what made him a star. Ringo was just good vibes. But after a good solid run of hits, the cheery atmosphere of Ringo-mania started to run out. His third album was a commercial disappointment, with only one semi-hit that fell short of the top 20. The times were changing, and Ringo's good fortune in life had started to seem less delightful and more grating and undeserved. But Ringo was not ready to give up the limelight, so the decision was made. Clearly the whole "with a little help from my friend" shtick was getting old, so instead, why don't we try and get by with
really highlights the worst parts of her characters. I think this is the worst it's ever been. She just lectures and screams at everyone the entire time. The only part I mildly enjoyed was the shot of the Griffin's basement where we see a ton of callbacks to previous episodes. They didn't need to do that. So the Griffins go to fake cars. They literally put people like Logan Paul and Lele Pons on screen. So, you know, Family Guy, I'm open if you ever want to do anything. Meg decides to become a social media celebrity, where she does nothing but eat food and becomes obese and gross. Brian also gets a Hummer and falls in love with it despite being so pro-environment previously. And so, you guessed it, he becomes a pretentious douchebag. This episode sucks. It's so desperate to be hip to the kids. It becomes hard to look at after a while due to the animation trying to gross you out as much as possible too. Oh yeah, I completely forgot. This is around the time when Adam West died in real life, sadly. They actually made a joke about him being dead a couple episodes ago, which is weird they make a joke about him being dead before even really acknowledging the fact that he did die. There's no real standard story for this one. It's mostly about characters standing around and talking about Adam West, with them trying to get the school renamed from James's High to Adam West High. For as sad as it is that Adam West died, this episode really doesn't do it justice. It barely even focuses on him. It's all about finding the next mayor for Gohan.
Oh, word?
Become Brian's new catchphrase. Yes, seriously. What a shitty way to commemorate him. This episode sucks. R.I.P. Adam West. Man, this season sucked hard. It was a little bit better than the last one overall, but the worst part ended up being way worse than the last one. Shit like Trump Guy and the Trans episode. They just need to get away from all this topical shit and focus on being funny, or at least occasionally successful at that. Season 18 is off to a fucking dreadful start, surprise, surprise. The family, Feet Joe, Feet Cleveland, Feet Quagmire, go out on a cruise, which ends up crashing in a storm and now they have to try and escape. This one is actually not terrible. We revisit Brian's relationship with Quagmire's mother, Ida, with him learning to be more comfortable in being seen with her, and eventually trying to be more of a loving partner, even attempting to be a good parental figure to Quagmire. Wait a second. There's a modern episode of Family Guy that makes Brian... What could possibly go wrong? Well, the issue really just comes from them trying to reset things back to the status quo. Quagmire hates Brian and so kicks Ida and ultimatum between him or Brian, and of course she chooses her son and dumps him. I feel like this should have went into another plot point of Quagmire realizing it's not fair to force his mother to follow only what he wants her to do, but no, it just ends there, walking out of the museum joke. Overall, this is an episode that I'm pretty mixed on. I basically enjoy everything up until the ending, but even then, we still have a really unfunny opening story that goes nowhere, so really only like 10 minutes of it is good.
You know what? Deserve that.
After their house burns down, the Griffins have to go and live with Lois's parents. Honestly, not much is done with this idea, it's odd. After they get to the house, they mostly just use this setting as a background, while we go through our regular stories. The dynamic between Peter and Babs isn't all that interesting. They learn that they're pretty similar, but she's a boring character, so I don't really care when they eventually split her and Carter up for the 5th time.
You kids are too young to remember that, but your parents are gonna hate it.
You know, they do this a lot now, where they'll acknowledge kids being Family Guy's main demographic, and I think that actually plays a lot into why the show is written the way it is now. I recall their 200th episode special, which I'm not doing because it's not a real episode of the show. They do interviews where the writers talk about how their kids and their kids' friends love the show, and I have to wonder, as the show went on, I have to believe it was written with younger teens in mind instead of adults. It would explain why they've completely given up on telling stories that adults would find interesting and in exchange for silly, fast-paced baby comedy. I don't know, just food for thought.